The Plaza Inn was built in 1924, closing down for structural renovations in the winter of 1988. My name is Arthur Vance, and I was hired as the night security supervisor during the reconstruction phase. The building was completely stripped of furniture, leaving only concrete slabs, exposed water pipes, and 60-year-old plaster. My shift ran from midnight until 8 in the morning. My only duty was to sit in the lobby, watch the entrance doors, and complete 2 physical walks through the hallways to ensure no vagrants were sleeping in the empty rooms. The first 3 nights were uneventful. The building had that heavy, dead silence common to abandoned properties. On the 4th night, the automated internal phone system on the lobby desk began to ring. The switchboard at the Plaza Inn was completely disconnected from the city lines. The copper cables in the basement had been cut with shears by the demolition crew 2 weeks prior. Internal calls could only be made if someone physically picked up a handset inside one of the guest rooms and dialed the desk directly. The digital display on the plastic console showed a single incoming line, room 412. I stared at the blinking red light on the switchboard for 30 seconds before I picked up the receiver. I expected to hear static, or perhaps the breathing of a local teenager who had broken in through the fire escape. Instead, the audio track was crystal clear. I heard the sound of running water. It wasn't the sound of an open pipe leaking into the floorboards, it was the distinct, rhythmic hiss of a modern shower running behind a plastic curtain. And underneath the water noise, there was a voice. It was a woman's voice, low and entirely calm, reading a sequence of random numbers: 1, 9, 2, 4, 7, 8. I told the caller that the building was a closed construction site and that they needed to leave immediately. The voice did not stop reading the numbers. The pacing remained perfectly regular, never pausing for a breath. I slammed the receiver down, grabbed my heavy metal flashlight, and headed toward the service elevator. The elevator right to the 4th floor took nearly a minute. The old cable system groaned under the weight of the cabin. When the metal doors slid open, the temperature in the hallway was significantly lower than in the lobby. My breath formed a faint gray mist in the air. I walked down the long corridor toward room 412. My boots made a loud, rhythmic thudding sound against the floorboards. The hallway lights had been removed, so my flashlight beam was the only source of clarity in the darkness. As I approached the door, I noticed the smell. It didn't smell like old plaster or dust, it smelled like heavy floral soap and damp wool. I looked down at the base of the door. A steady stream of water was moving out from under the gap, soaking the old carpet. It wasn't clear water. It had a dark, rusty yellow tint that looked like old pipe residue. I reached out and turned the brass doorknob. The door was unlocked. The room inside was completely dark, save for the moonlight coming through the unwashed window. The concrete floor was covered in an inch of standing water. In the center of the room, sitting directly in the puddle, was the old tan telephone. The plastic handset was off the hook, floating face down in the water. The shower hissed from the bathroom behind the drywall. The bathroom door was shut tight, but the outline of the frame was glowing with a faint, pale yellow light that shouldn't have been there. The power grid for the upper floors had been dead for 6 months. I pushed the bathroom door open with the tip of my boot. The rusted hinges gave a loud, metallic whine that cut through the sound of the running water. The air inside the small room was thick with hot steam, coating my flashlight lens in condensation. I wiped the glass with my shirt sleeve and pointed the beam at the bathtub. The white vinyl shower curtain was drawn completely shut. Behind the thin material, the silhouette of a person was standing perfectly still under the stream of water. The head was angled strangely, resting flat against the tiled wall as if the neck bones were entirely fluid. The woman's voice began again. It wasn't coming from the phone in the main room, it was coming from directly behind the vinyl curtain. 1, 9, 2, 4, 7, 8. I reached out with a trembling hand, caught the edge of the curtain, and pulled it back. The bathtub was empty. The porcelain basin was dry, covered in a thick layer of gray dust and dead centipedes that had accumulated over years of disuse. The shower head was cold, rusted solid to the pipe. But the voice didn't stop. It was coming from inside the drain. A long, thin strand of gray hair was slowly lifting out of the metal grate, reaching upward into the empty air like a wire. I left the building at 3 o'clock that morning. I did not return to the lobby to collect my personal belongings, and I did not sign the exit logbook. The Plaza Inn was completely demolished by controlled explosives 3 weeks later. The concrete foundation was dug out and replaced with a commercial parking structure. The city tracking records show that during the 1924 opening season, a guest named Clara Vance checked into room 412. She never checked out. Her family file was closed due to a lack of physical evidence. This concludes multi-unit audio log Exhibit B. If you are staying in an older hotel tonight, and the internal telephone rings without an outside line, do not pick up the handset. They are checking if the room is still occupied. The Vanderbilt Tower is a 30-story luxury hotel operating in the downtown district. My name is Samuel Cole, and I worked as the overnight elevator maintenance technician for the property during the spring of 1994. Modern hotel elevators are equipped with load-sensing safety switches beneath the cabin floor. If the weight inside the elevator exceeds the maximum limit, an automated brake locks the cables to prevent the car from dropping down the shaft. On the night of March 22nd, the central computer in the basement triggered an automatic system alarm. Service elevator car number 3 was parked on the vacant 24th floor, a floor that was locked for asbestos abatement. According to the digital logs, the car was empty, but the load sensor was registering a weight of 480 pounds. The alarm indicated that the weight was fluctuating rapidly, dropping to zero and climbing back up within a matter of seconds. I grabbed my toolkit, bypassed the security elevator locks with my master key, and took car number 2 up to the 24th floor to inspect the mechanical sensors beneath the floor plates. The 24th floor was completely dark. The hotel management had pulled the breakers for the hallway lights to save utility costs during the abatement work. The air was thick with the chemical smell of industrial adhesive and damp concrete. I walked down the plastic-lined corridor toward the elevator lobby. My flashlight beam cut through the dust motes in the air, illuminating the heavy steel doors of car number 3. The digital indicator above the door was dark, but the call button was glowing a solid, bright red. I stepped up to the doors, pulled my mechanical release key from my belt, and inserted it into the crescent-shaped emergency hole at the top of the frame. I turned the key, releasing the safety clutch, and pulled the heavy outer doors open by hand. The elevator car was sitting perfectly level with the floor. I shone my flashlight inside. The gray moving pads on the walls were dusty, but the floor was empty. No tools, no trash, no construction debris. But the digital weight display on the internal control panel was blinking a steady numbers code, 480 pounds. As I watched, the number jumped to 720 pounds. I stepped into the empty cabin and knelt in the center of the floor to open the metal access plate that covers the load sensors. The metal was cold to the touch, vibrating with a high-frequency sound that made my teeth ache. I pulled my voltmeter from my case and connected the leads to the sensor terminals. The electrical current was steady. The sensors weren't broken. That meant the weight inside the car was real. Thud. The sound came from directly above my head. It sounded like something heavy and soft hitting the roof of the elevator cabin. The metal ceiling plates flexed downward under the impact, the thin aluminum frame groaning under a sudden pressure. I stood up and shone my flashlight at the ceiling ventilation grate. The small square grate was secured by 4 steel screws. Through the narrow gaps in the metal slats, a dark, oily fluid was slowly dripping onto the gray carpet below. It wasn't machine oil. It had a dark, coppery smell that filled the cabin instantly. Then, the elevator doors behind me slammed shut on their own. The internal control panel died, leaving me in total darkness except for my flashlight beam. The digital weight display began to climb aggressively. 900, 1200, 1800, the elevator cabin began to sink into the shaft, dropping 6 inches below the floor level as the cables stretched under the load. Above me, a second screw fell from the ventilation grate. Something was pushing the grate down from the outside. I shone my light directly through the opening. A face was pressed against the other side of the metal slats. It didn't have features, no eyes, no nose, no hair. The skin was a pale, wet gray, stretched tightly over a bone structure that looked like a human skull with too many jaws. It was using its long, thin fingers to turn the remaining screws from the inside of the shaft. The metal grate gave way, dropping to the floor with a loud clang. From the dark square opening in the ceiling, a long, gray arm dropped down into the cabin. The skin was covered in deep, parallel ridges that looked exactly like old wood bark. The arm didn't reach for me. It reached for the elevator control panel, its long fingers pressing the button for the lowest basement level. The security crew found car number 3 parked in the sub-basement storage vault at 6:30 a.m. The elevator doors had been pried open from the inside with an industrial crowbar. Maintenance technician Samuel Cole was not found on the property. His tool bag and digital voltmeter were left on the floor of the cabin, surrounded by a thick layer of wet topsoil and dead leaves. The load sensors were tested by an independent engineering firm the following afternoon. They found no mechanical faults. This concludes mechanical log number 11. If you are riding a hotel elevator alone late tonight, and the weight indicator displays a number higher than your own weight, do not look up at the ceiling panels. They are already inside the car with you. The Greystone Motel was a 12-room roadside property located on the perimeter of the County Forestry Reserve. My name is John Vance, and I worked the night desk shift during the autumn of 1991. The motel was rarely full. Most nights, we had 2 or 3 long-haul truck drivers or travelers passing through the valley. On the night of November 2nd, a man checked into room 7 at approximately 11 o'clock. He did not bring any luggage, and he paid for the room with a crisp $50 bill that smelled strongly of wet earth and damp wood. He signed the register using the name Arthur Miller, a name that matched a local missing persons file from 1974. At midnight, the guest in room 7 walked back to the reception office. He didn't complain about the room or ask for extra towels. He simply requested a small brass screwdriver, stating that the lens on his door peephole was dusty and needed to be cleaned from the inside. I gave him the tool from our maintenance drawer and forgot about the interaction until my 3 o'clock security walk. As I walked down the concrete path past the parked vehicles, I noticed that the lights inside room 7 were turned off. The room was completely dark, but the small brass peephole in the center of the door was glowing with a faint, pale yellow light that looked like a small eye in the wood. I stepped closer to the door frame to see if the guest had left a flashlight running near the entrance. When I got within 3 inches of the wood, I realized the brass peephole fixture had been modified. The guest hadn't cleaned the lens, he had reversed it. In a standard hotel room, the peephole lens is designed to let the person inside see out, while the outside view remains blurry and distorted. By reversing the glass elements, anyone standing on the walkway could look directly into the room with perfect clarity. I leaned forward, closed my left eye, and pressed my right eye against the brass cylinder to see what was happening inside the dark room. The interior of room 7 was completely stripped of its mattress and carpeting. The concrete slab beneath the old frame was dug out in the center, revealing a deep, narrow hole in the soil that led straight down into the earth. Sitting on the edge of the hole was the guest, Arthur Miller. He was sitting with his back to the door, perfectly still. He wasn't wearing his jacket anymore. His bare back was covered in deep gray ridges that looked exactly like human ribs wrapped in gray leather. The branches of an oak tree were growing out of his shoulder blades, extending upward into the ceiling plaster like thick gray veins. As I watched through the glass lens, his head slowly turned a full 180 degrees around his neck. His face didn't have eyes, just deep, dark hollows filled with wet soil. He shone a small pocket flashlight directly at the door peephole. The light hit the glass lens, reflecting straight into my eye. But he wasn't looking at the door. He was tracking the movement of my iris through the reversed glass. He knew exactly who was standing on the concrete path outside. I pulled my head back from the door and stumbled backwards into the gravel driveway. My eye felt incredibly cold, as if the glass lens had drawn all the heat out of my skull. Behind the wooden door of room 7, the clicking started. Click. Click. And click. It sounded like two stones being struck together underwater. The sound moved from the interior of the room, through the keyhole, and out onto the concrete walkway. I ran back to the reception office, slammed the heavy glass door shut, and twisted the deadbolt lock. I didn't turn on the lights. I dropped to the floor behind the laminate counter and stared at the security monitor that overlooked the walkway. On the monitor screen, the door to room 7 was wide open. A long, gray branch, flexible like a human spine, was sliding out of the room. It dragged itself along the concrete path, moving with a strange, sideways gait toward the office doors. It wasn't exploring. It was following the exact line of my boot prints in the frost. The Greystone Motel was permanently closed by the State Guard unit on November 4, 1991. The entire property was fenced off with chain-link barriers and classified as an unmonitored zone due to sudden underground soil collapses. And I was placed under psychiatric care after my exit statement was rejected by the local sheriff's department. The motel register from that night was recovered from the site. The signature for room 7 was found completely crossed out with deep, jagged teeth marks. This concludes Police Archive File #1991A. If you are staying in a roadside motel tonight, and you notice the brass peephole lens looks loose or dirty, do not look through the glass. They are already looking back into the room to see where you are sitting.